Good morning. This is the Chapter 4A video for database course. And what we're doing with Chapter 4, the text breaks this chapter into two sections, 4A and 4B. In 4A, what you're doing is just getting to understand that PL SQL programming language structure and basically working with some variables and defining variables in one section or declaring variables in one section and then working with them a little bit in another section. So that's really what this chapter is doing. It's a pretty straightforward chapter, and so it'll work out really well. So the first thing, again, the objectives, we want to understand the initial structure of the PL SQL programming language. Take a look at those PL SQL blocks. Begin, or I should say declare, begin, exception, and then end, and then displaying the output. That's a big deal, and it's a really, it's just syntax stuff. It's how it has to be, how information has to be displayed. Working with variables, concatenating information, or putting one piece with another and putting it all together. We have a really big working example, and then just some additional functions within that working example for left trims, right trims, uppercase, lowercase, and a knit cap, and then a little bit about error messages. Now, PL SQL is a full-featured programming language. It's interpreted. Remember, we've talked about what interpreted means before. Again, a semicolon will end each one of the command lines, and then again you have reserved words: declare, begin, exception. So again, those are reserved words that you have to be aware of. Now, typically, this is the structure that you'll typically see in, or the capitalization styles, I should probably say that, within this PL SQL programming language. Again, just like using uppercase and certain case within your creating tables, within inserting data, all of those pieces, it is not case sensitive. But the typical convention is that the reserved words are uppercase, functions like count and toDate, uppercase, data formats or data types, uppercase, SQL commands are uppercase, and then objects like tables, like object names, like sequence names for instance, and variable names all in lowercase. But case doesn't matter. Now what you have to do, because you are putting information into basically either an implicit or explicit cursor, as you'll see in 4B. You're putting this information out there now into memory. So with that said, you need to set the buffer size large enough so that it'll hold that memory and then output that data. So what you have to do basically, and that discussion's on 198, set server output on size 4000. It can be 10,000, it may be 2,000, maybe that's not enough, but if you just set server output on size 4000, that sets that buffer size, and so you'll actually get some output. Okay, now and then I'm going to actually demonstrate the error message that not the error. It's not an error. It's a lack of any kind of output that you'll get if you don't set that first. Okay, so these blocks. And again, I'm going to try to be quick about this particular video. You have some different blocks and different pieces of this actual program. The first piece is declare. So in this particular section, you have to declare those variables. The second block is the execution block, and it is defined as begin. Okay, so you have declare block, the begin block, the exception block. That handles all the error handling pieces of that. So we won't work with that. We may work with it a little bit, but we'll work with the exception block very little. You're going to have your hands full with just understanding declare, and especially the begin block and what happens within that. Now, really important, the colon equals is the syntax for assigning values to variables. Okay, so basically, in short, it means equals. So again, anytime you have sort of this equals and you're assigning values to variables, this colon equals is the syntax that you'll need to use. So the example is if you have a variable defined as C first and you want to make current customer, this is the equals. Okay, now the next piece of this is displaying output. So your DBMS output line, and then in parentheses, if you have text, you have to put the text within single quotes. And then, of course, a semicolon at the end. This is just the typical syntax that you need to use to print information to the screen within this PL/SQL structure. Now, an example here, though, notice that we have display text here. That's just text being output, like a header information, for instance. Now, if you just want to print a variable, then notice that you have the DBMS output.put line, parentheses, and then simply the variable name. That will output that variable to the screen. Now, we start to kind of get into what this PL/SQL structure should look like. I've told you about declare, I've told you about begin, and then of course we have end. And it concludes the program. So with the declare section, what we're doing is creating a variable, and we're defining it as the data type as a date field. So where have you seen this before? When you create all of your tables, variable, and then what does the field look like? Date. Okay, it's a date field. Now in the begin block, so you're declaring all your variables first. In the begin block, you can just simply say today's date, because you have to declare the variable here. You have to set up the variable first, and then you can say today's date equals, now remember what that equals look like, sysdate. Sysdate is the computer system's date itself. So today's date right now is going to be carried over into today's date, and then to print that output, DBMS output.put line. Now, and again, this is text, that today's date, and if you want SQL to display one single quote, you need the syntax is 2 single quotes. So it's just a syntax thing. So today's date is, and then DBMS output on the next line, just the variable. And then you end that with an end and semicolon, and then put a / below that. Okay, so again, this is what that structure looks like. Okay, now this is a little bit more about that variable declaration. So just like we did here, today's date and date, that looks just like that table structure. When you set up a table, you use the very same idea, whether it's a number, whether it's another variable. Every single variable that you use within that begin block has to be declared in the declare section. So we want to declare current customer first. What's it look like? Varchar 2 20, and in this case with just 4a, equals Neil. Now, is there a real practical purpose for doing this, setting a variable up this way, defining a variable, telling Oracle what it looks like, Varchar 2 20 equals Neil? There's no practical reason for it other than just simply getting to understand a little bit about how this structure works. In real applications, real life applications, you're going to simply define the variables, and then you're going to pull the information, Neil for instance, out of a database. Okay, but this is simply helping you understand how to work with these in 4a. 4b will pull the information from a database. Okay, and again, these particular data types, you can use varchar 2, char, date, numbers, all of those. Okay, now the concatenating piece. So what we want to do is add one piece to another to another, and it's a little hinky, but it's the way it is. It's a syntax. It is what it is. Current customer name. If we want it to equals, then current customer first. Let's say that's been defined in the declare section, John. And then you have to add, concatenate, a space, and then you have to concatenate or add the last name. Now if you don't do that, it's going to be John Doe right next to each other. So you have to add John, concatenate a space, concatenate the last name. So again, it's a syntax situation. What this should also, then once you build this, John Doe, what we're doing in the next line is printing out, and we're saying, because this is included in single quotes, customer name, and you concatenate this current customer name here into this print statement. So that should print out customer name colon space John space Doe. Okay, now this is the syntax to actually do that, and there's a little bit more stuff here too, but we're declaring current customer first, varchar 220 John, okay, current customer last, varchar 230 Doe, and remember that varchar 2 is going to be, if the name is longer, it's going to use that much space. If it's shorter, it's going to use less space. Current customer name, now varchar 230, think about this, that's where the first and last name have been put together. That should actually be probably 50, because your potential, did I not? Okay, come on, there we go. Your potential is 20 plus 30, and this will respond in just a minute. There we go, maybe a little too much. So that potential needs to be 20 plus 30. And then current order number, we want to pull that information to. We may or may not in this example. I guess we probably don't in this example. I think you do in the example on 4A, or the problems on 4A. And then current order date, that's the variable name. Date is the date field equals, and then we can go ahead and enter in a particular date using the toDate function. Now, and then we have current customer name equals current customer first and last. That's what we saw in the last example, in the last page. Print out customer name with the output first and last into customer name, and then that current customer name variable printed. And then we want to concatenate the date on this. And I think this is correct. We see the variable, and then space, and then the format model here. What we should do is pull those spaces out of that format model. Okay, and then we have and then that forward slash. Now, and what that should look like is this. And PL SQL programming procedure successfully completed. Now, remember, I'm going to copy this. But remember, we went back to there. We had to set server output on size 4000. That sets up the buffer. Now, where are we at? We're on that slide. I'm going to go to here and then paste the command. That's this program. Okay, but we don't have any output. It says a PL SQL program, a procedure successfully completed, but there's no output. What will happen is if you don't set server output on size 4000 first, which sets the buffer size, you will run the program, and even if it's successful, you'll just get this command that says successfully completed, but you won't get any real output. There we go. So so that doesn't quite format out the way we want, because I'm not putting it on the second line or putting some spaces into it. We would want to put some spaces into it here. But there you go. We have that. We have that. Now, let's fix that really quickly. So we want to go and concatenate. And I need to put in, remember the single quotes, the correct single quote. Concatenate a single quote. And then concatenate the toChar. Now let me grab this whole thing once more. And then paste that in there, and now you can see the difference, the change. Alright, now I don't want to make this video too long, so I'm going to move forward. toChar, we've done that. toDate, we've done that. I just want you to remember that even if we have a string, like say a telephone number that's a string, we can still take that information, that telephone number, and change it to a number using a toNumber function. So So even though it's a string, don't think it's not, that information isn't changeable. Now, we're also using left trim and right trim a little bit. Problem 3 requires editing strings. Here are the examples to do this. And so now examples well, I have examples following. So the string, and again, equals the length of that particular variable. Now that may be 4, 5, 10 characters. That's what that brings back. That's the output. And then we're modifying case. We're changing the case of this particular variable to uppercase, to lowercase, and then a init cap. If you have a name, every word within that name will be init capped, will be capitalized. Okay, now, and this is that really large example. So we have our declare, we have our begin, end, and that slash. So we're defining all of our variables, John and Doe. Current customer name, again, that should end up being 50, shouldn't it? Because 20 plus 30, so that means there's a potential of 50. And then we're taking a look at left, let's see, defining some additional variables. Where I'm defining left, it's a varchar 220, and I'm putting a bunch of spaces left. Now that's not really going to show in the example what it does very well, because by default Oracle will go ahead and pull these left spaces out regardless. Right, though, should show what's happening with both of these functions. Right, I'm adding a bunch of spaces into the right side of this particular string. Number length is defined as binary integer. Let's see, uppercase, lowercase, and init cap. So within the begin block, I'm printing out the name. Now, what you have to do sometimes just to format this out, so you have a heading information, a space, and then the rest of your information. You may need to put in a dbms output.put line, and then within single quotes a single dot. That will create a line and bump the rest of the output down to the next line. There isn't anything within SQL that'll enter a carriage return necessarily, or a space, hard break. Okay, let's see. So then we want to go to dbms output left trim, and we'll see what that looks like. Right trim, we'll see what that looks like. You notice I'm putting some dots in here to demonstrate that it's going to pull all those right spaces out, show the number, uppercase and lowercase. So let me go ahead and grab this and put this in there. You see left customer name, John Doe, left test, right test. You see the spaces, but when you trim it, it pulls the spaces out. It does the same thing for left, but Oracle automatically, or SQL automatically pulls out those left spaces. Uppercase, lowercase, and then the init cap. Okay, so that's what that looks like, and that's what that example does. And then some common errors. Now, if you just use the equals instead of the colon equals, it's going to tell you. Encounter the symbol equals when expecting something different. And in conclusion, now we understand the initial structure of this PL/SQL programming language. We've looked at PL/SQL programming blocks. We've talked about displaying the output, working with variables, concatenating information, or concatenating pieces of information, variables. We put it all together. We had a couple of working examples. We looked at additional functions, left trim, right trim, uppercase, lowercase, and init caps, and we looked at error messages. So hopefully that's enough to get you started with 4A, and everything that you've learned in 4A will be used in 4B. So 4A is very simple, very straightforward. 4B will become more complex, but you need to get the structure and how how variables and printing output, that kind of stuff works. Okay, thank you.